Okay, good morning. We are wrapping up week 8 here, and this is the last set of lectures where I'm going to deal with Sojourner Truth, or Isabella Baumfree, who renamed herself as Sojourner Truth. Um, Now, of course, I've put these two women together in part on purpose to show you the unbelievable range of the way mysticism has spoken into the Protestant tradition. They live only 100 years apart. So, Isabella Baumfree, of course, Sojourner Truth, was born in 1797. So she was born, even less than 100 years, because she was born, about 70, 80 years before Lillian Stavely. These two women could not be more different, right? On the one hand, we have Lillian Stavely, who's this unbelievably privileged, wealthy English woman living at a time when the British Empire is ascendant. It rules the world, basically. And she comes, as we saw, a little bit from that mindset. However, she, through her own suffering, which included being struck by lightning, and then, the suffering that was brought about by her realization of her sinful nature and her sinful life prior to meeting Christ, she really comes to this deep, deep mystical or spiritual life. On the other hand, we have Sojourner Truth, whose entire life was defined by suffering, or her early life, of course, born into slavery. If you've watched the video, Ain't I a Woman, which I thought was, it's such a powerful speech. If the woman walking back and forth drives you crazy, there are a number of other prominent women who have recorded that speech, including, I think, one of the best is Alfre Woodard. So you can Google the actress Alfre Woodard and her discussion of the speech. The thing I liked about the speech that I posted for you is I like this woman. I think she really captures who I think of as Sojourner Truth, and I like that she's in costume. It kind of even gives it a little bit more of an air of authenticity. So in any event, you know that Sojourner bore the lash. She was lashed. She was beaten. She was forced to marry a fellow slave. She bore, I don't know, 13, 14 children, had children sold off, away from her and sold into slavery. She actually was the first woman to bring a lawsuit, first African American slave to successfully bring a lawsuit to recover her son who was illegally sold into slavery. She's just this pillar of strength and this amazing, amazing woman. And it all goes back to, and you'll see this, there's a bust of Sojourner Truth now in the Capitol building. It was installed during the Obama administration. Michelle Obama gave the speech, for the unveiling of the bust. Oprah Winfrey has talked about Sojourner Truth. She's become a real magnet for African and women's feminist movement. And just for women in general, and for so many people look back to Sojourner now as this pillar of strength, and yet nobody's looking at why she's a pillar of strength. And I assert that she became this amazing activist and social leader, all because of conversation that she had with Jesus, a mystical experience, right? Because otherwise it's a little hard to have a conversation with Jesus, absent that feeling the presence of God. And that's how we are just defining mysticism or mystical experience. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how Jesus spoke into Sojourner's life and shaped who she became as a social activist. So if you take a look at the first set of slides, the first PowerPoint. Oh, and then in the second PowerPoint, we're also going to talk about Joy Bostick's book. Excellent book, African American Female Mysticism. I was going to assign pages from this book. It's an extremely academic book, so I decided that I would lecture from it instead rather than assign pages because it would take you a long time to read, and I think that your time can be better spent actually learning and reading about Sojourner. Her, of course, her biography is available. You can Google Sojourner Truth, and her biography or her autobiography will come up, and you can take a look at that if you're interested. So Sojourner was born into slavery in 1797. She was an abolitionist. She went on to become an abolitionist and a women's rights activist. She escaped to freedom in 1846. Fascinating story there. She lectured widely for African American and women's rights, and she died in 1883. So she lived a good long life. Her accomplishments include meeting with 2 presidents, not just, an amazing feat for an African American woman of this time. She met with Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. She was the first African American woman, as I said, to sue and win in a court against a white. She was able to sue over her son being illegally sold into slavery. She recruited Black soldiers during the war, and she actually, when she met with Lincoln, she lobbied to have Lincoln admit Black soldiers into the Union Army, and he ultimately agreed to do that. She also sought land grants for former slaves, and this was, it went all the way to the Congress and Senate. They approved the bill to approve these land grants, and then at the last minute, the bill did not pass, so the land grants didn't go forward. But she, had that happened, it would have changed the trajectory of our history and race relations in this country. So she was she had incredible foresight, and I truly wish that, some of these things that she tried to bring about, could have happened. But anyway, so she also made her own livelihood. She supported herself. How did she support herself? Well, if you take a look on slide number 4 in the first set of PowerPoints, you see this little card, and it says, it has her picture on it, and it says, "I sell the shadow to support the substance," Sojourner Truth. So what does that mean? So she would go, when she went to speaking engagements, she would, much as like someone now would write a book, and then they go to the speaking engagements and they sell the book. People buy the book, and that helps support them. So Sojourner didn't have the ability to write a book, right? She was raised in slavery. She was illiterate her entire life. She had people read to her, so she became quite well educated because she enlisted people to read to her. However, she could not read herself. She could not write. As a result, she didn't have a book to sell, so instead she had these cards, and she would speak. People would be so impressed with her speech that they wanted a piece of her, and so after the speech she would sell these cards that say, "I sell the shadow," the picture, to support the substance, Sojourner herself, and people would buy the cards and she would be able to support herself. So ingenious way of being able to attain what she wanted to attain, which was this position of social activism, and yet still be able to support herself. She ended up buying her own home. She spoke before white audiences throughout the North and the West. Now, keep in mind at this time, the South we were embroiled in the Civil War, and then even after the Civil War, the South was not receptive to having African American women speak. However, there were many people in the North and the West who were, and many of those people many of these abolitionists that were living at this time and were evangelicals. So it's important to think not only on how Sojourner herself speaks into the evangelical tradition, into the Protestant tradition, but how the tenor of the times, and how in the South, unfortunately, the Bible and evangelicalism was being used for not as positive a result in the world. The North, the people were truly working to bring about the end of slavery and a more equal society. So, so Sojourner's narrative, which she had someone help her with, so that she was able to write her own autobiography. That was widely read, and it also generated sales. So so Truth's legacy was over 3,000 people came to her funeral. She was memorialized on a postage stamp. She's an inspiration, as I said. Oprah Winfrey, Sojourner Truth, Michelle Obama, Alfre Woodard, so many prominent African American women today look back to Sojourner as a real kind of, Oprah Winfrey, for instance, calls her a mentor. So so she really is an inspiration to so many people today. And she's remembered in the calendar of saints by both the Episcopal and Lutheran churches. So what was going on in this time when Sojourner lived? Now, there was this, as I said, in the South, there was this kind of unholy bond between slavery and Christianity. And so masters often conducted servants for services, Christian services for their slaves. There were either itinerant preachers that would come and preach, or the masters themselves would preach to the slaves. They preached the virtues of obedience and honesty that served their ends, right? And they preached a vengeful and punishing God. And the slaves began to equate the master with God. And as a result, had a very, very unholy alliance with God. I mean, the slaves were feeling absolutely oppressed by God because they were oppressed by these masters. Now, how did Sojourner end up with such a positive relationship with God, a positive view of God and Jesus? Well, she followed her mom's advice, and her mom's advice was, and this is from her narrative. She writes, or the writer writes, "My children, there is a God who hears and sees you." "A God, Mama? Where does he live?" asked the children. "He lives in the sky," she replied. "And when you are beaten or cruelly treated or fall into any trouble, you must ask help of him, and he will always hear you and help you." That's from slide number 7 of the PowerPoint. So Sojourner's mother, Isabella Baumfrey's mother, was able to kind of recast this God and present an alternative God who is helpful and loving, in contrast to the vengeful God that was being preached on the plantations. And so what does Isabella say of her mother's faith? She says, "She would sometimes repeat 'Our Father in Heaven' in her Low Dutch, as taught her by her mother. After that, all was from the suggestions of her own rude mind." Rude being, kind of an uneducated mind, because keep in mind, these people were not allowed to be educated. She related to God in minute detail all her troubles and sufferings, inquiring as she proceeded, "Do you think that's right, God?" and closed by begging to be delivered from the evil, whatever it might be. So Sojourner's mother really presented a wonderful example for Sojourner to envision or imagine a different way of relating to God. And so that was very important then to, I think, predispose Sojourner later in her life to having a true relationship with Christ. So Sojourner actually, as she then matured and became, her mother passed on, and she was, serving as a slave in various households. She established a prayer practice. And how would she do this? In this one particular, keep in mind, Sojourner was a slave in the North, not the South. So she was able, at a time when abolition had not been granted to the North or the South, and so Sojourner was able to, during her day, slip away, find an island in a stream that she created a prayer altar. She created like a small room by pulling away branches from the center and leaving them on the outside so that she couldn't be seen in this island. And then with the babbling brook, around her, the noise of the water, she couldn't be heard either. So she could go into this room, no one could see her, no one could hear her, and she could talk to God. And she could actually yell and scream at God, I think, from time to time, and speak louder to him because no one could hear her. And she says she prayed at least daily and more frequently in difficult times. So, and I can imagine that she prayed much the way her mother prayed, which was, I'm enduring these sufferings and difficulties, and do you think that's right, God? And help me to endure this. So anyway, this gets us up to Isabella's prayer practice. As I said, in the next set of lectures, we'll go on to see how this prayer practice helped to transform Sojourner's life, and we'll talk a little bit about Joy Bostick's book. Farewell for now.